work into the second chakra, one of the things that we are always reminded of is we are part of generation. You know, nobody exists in isolation. Whatever your relationship is with your family, it is a relationship, it is a bond. And my grandma was such a special person. She was very strong. She had 9 children. She had my mother when she was 17 years old. It was a different time, right? Like back then, women had children very young. There was not a lot of options about what you wanted to do with your life. They were very poor. But you know, if there's one thing I've learned from her, I've never heard her complain. She never had very much, but she was very abundant. And she taught me a lot about what abundance can be, not in a material way. So, yeah, this one is for her.
We love you.
Thank you. And this is what I have been thinking about when I was writing what I wanted to talk about today. So maybe I'll start for those of you who are new to Ayurveda. So just like yoga, Ayurveda is a healthcare system that is 5,000 years old. Ayur means life in Sanskrit and Veda means wisdom. And it is a life science. It is a very old life science, and it's been around because our biology has been the same for thousands of years. We are a technology that is continuously evolving in our mind and in our body. And you know, we are, when I look at tech around us, so we're all into AI now, right? Like I get a million emails today about what AI can do and how AI will change my business, blah, blah, blah. And every time I think about artificial intelligence, where is true intelligence? We are an incredible form of intelligence that comes from nature. And I hope what you will get out of today's session is how to use your innate intelligence, right? Because one of the things I find happens these days because we have so much technology is we get really carried away by tech. You watch something on Instagram or on TikTok and you think it's true. How many of us feel like this? Can we get swept away a little bit? Yeah. And you know, I'm very conscious about this because I'm on Instagram. I put my content out there. It's part of what I have to do. But I just wanted to start by urging you all to consider that anything you take in, any information you get in, there is a wisdom in your body that knows what is true and what is not, what is sensible and what doesn't seem so sensible. And so I invite you to use this session to go home after this and go through what are the things I'm doing that are coming from a place of inner wisdom, and what are the things I'm doing that are coming because I heard it somewhere and somebody told me it was a good idea, and maybe it doesn't sit so well with me. Can we do that? So just stoke your own inner juices and see what comes up there. All right, so I'll do a little recap. So we're just going back to Svadhisthana. So the sacral chakra, Svadhisthana chakra, Svadhisthana. Sva is self, right? So who you are at your most essential self. Dhisthana, adhisthana means where the sthana is, where the self stays, where the self sits. So your home. And one way of thinking about Svadhisthana in terms of the creative side is, you know, where you are most natural, where you are most authentic is somewhere sitting in here, you know. And so in my practice, when I think about how do I know someone's Svadhisthana is working and it's moving, is you have to flow. You have to flow in all aspects of life. So when you're moving on the mat, you know, simple things are you flowing? Is it easy? It doesn't mean that you get all the way into the shape. That is secondary. But are you moving with ease? Is it a little bit creaky and a little bit clicky? So those are signs that, maybe the flow is a little bit interrupted. Are you open to trying something new? For example, if you've never put your leg up, would you give it a go even if you knew you were going to fall over? Are you okay with that? On the other hand, if you know that today is not the day for you to raise your hand all the way up, will you do it anyway and push yourself past comfort? So there's always a balance. And Svadhisthana means knowing yourself well enough to know where I should push and where I should say, no, I'm okay. I can be here. Somebody else can be in a different shape, but we're both doing yoga, right? So all of this is about knowing the self and connecting with what is going on inside your creative body. The element connected to Svadhisthana is water, right? So I like to think you got to get juicy with yourself in every sense of the word. So at a very biological level, what is water in your body? Can anyone, what do we think? Where do you feel fluidity and water in your body? What do you think about?
Bladder.
Sorry?
The bladder.
The bladder, that's right. And where is the bladder? The kidneys and the bladder. They sit here. What else sits here? Your stomach. So your large intestine, your colon, is actually sitting near the sacrum. And so nobody wants to talk about this, but I hope everybody went to the toilet this morning, because as an Ayurvedic practitioner, that is the first thing I ask. What goes in must come out. Otherwise, you have a blockage. And most of us don't really consider the fact that a blockage is a blockage everywhere. You don't get to escape your body. And your body's implications on your mind are very, very significant, right? So that is also flow. The other thing that sits here are your reproductive organs, right? Male and female. So everything that's juicy, that flows, sits in here. Your hormones are created and produced here. We always thought that how we felt was up here, but the chakra system has taught us that there is a feedback loop from the hormones you make down here, lifting up into what you experience in your five senses as your perception of the world. As any woman will tell you, a woman with a menstrual cycle, the 5 days before she gets her period, she is a very different person to the 5 days after she gets her period. What is that? Unless you have a serious personality disorder, you just have a menstrual cycle, and that's just your hormones. Similarly, men are a circadian cycle. So how you feel in the morning and how you feel by the late evening is very different, because your body is creating different hormones through the day. And so, part of what the chakra system is teaching us is the chakra is a wheel, right? And I have an engineering background, so I think of everything, in that way. It's like gears. So you've got this system of gears, right, running through your body, and they all tick together. They're all rotating together, and they are kind of shifting the energy of different functions in your body, right? So you did the first chakra, Muladhara chakra, last Saturday. So Muladhara is connected to the earth element. So you think about it, right? You need a foundation. If you were a plant in a pot, first I need to put the earth, right? And once I've got a good quality earth, I pour the water. Then only can I plant the seed. And from that seed, you will grow. All parts of you, doesn't matter, physical, mental, emotional, the pot has to be solid and stable, and it has to be warm and moist. Otherwise, how can we grow? So all through your life, whatever stage of life you're in now, these are the elements, and this is how they move through us. And you feel it everywhere, because the earth and the water elements, they are stable. They are what holds us. Think about lying on the ground in Shavasana. What do we like about it? You're held, right? You literally, I've got your back. You're lying against the earth, you are being held. That is what the heavier elements do for us. And so when you have enough of those heavy elements, even emotionally higher up, even mentally, that element is helping bring stability to the mind. Does this make sense? Yeah? Okay. So the water element tells us that I'm looking, so if I was asking you, how is your Svadhisthana chakra going? I'm going to ask you things like, any aches and pains in your joints, tight shoulders, painful knees. When you're sitting in warrior pose, for example, do you feel a little bit cricky? Are you feeling a little bit loose or a little bit tight in your hips? Do you have lower back pain? That is a primary cause of imbalance is in Svadhisthana chakra, is lower back pain. Are you having any menstrual related issues? How is your libido? How is pleasure and desire for you? Do you have any urinary tract issues, UTIs, any kind of issue going to the toilet? Are you hydrated? Fluid, right? So most of us in this weather, we forget to drink water, right? And that creates a narrowing and a blockage in the body, and we get very dried out. And winter is a hard time for the body, and most of us do get quite dry, and we get a little bit frazzled in this weather, right? It's windy, it's cold, it's easy to feel swept away by the weather. So this is where those heavier elements are really helpful. Yeah? Okay, so that's the water element. Now, if we think about that from a more emotional level, so our emotions, so if I asked you, what's your personality like, right? So I used to be someone who was very sure of, I could tell you, Danya is like blah, 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 blah. I had a lot of opinions about a lot of things, and I was dead sure I was right all the time. It didn't work out so well for me, let's say. And what I've discovered since coming to yoga and Ayurveda that is a little bit different from conventional science and wisdom is we think we are very fixed, but actually we are always adjusting and changing according to where we are in life, right? It's like how, if you think about what you're like in summer and what you're like right now, it's almost like you're two different people. And that's not strange at all. That is how we are. Think about the tree. If the tree in the middle of winter was full of leaves because it wanted to be beautiful, it would die just because it does not have the energy to maintain that level of consumption. Just like nature, we have to flow. We have to adjust at different stages of life. So how you live in each season, tune into how you feel, because those things are telling you what you need. And so too do our emotions. So our personality and our emotions seem to be very connected. For example, like if when I'm doing an assessment with someone, I'll ask them something like, so what's your stress response like? You know, what do you do when something's not going your way? Somebody will tell me, oh, I get really angry and irritable. You know, I'm prone to getting angry and shouting at someone. Somebody else will be like, oh, I get really anxious and I literally just panic and I run away. Somebody else will say, oh, I just feel really dull and depressed and I go back and I just lie in bed and I don't want to get up. Does this ring a bell? Something in there may resonate with you. So in Ayurveda, we say that this is because we all have a different combination of the elements. And that elemental makeup that makes up how we are, it kind of determines a little bit around how we respond to life and our emotions. What I tend to see a lot of is there is no right or wrong way to respond. Everybody does it their own way. But the intensity at which we experience life. So you can be angry or you can be raging, right? You can be anxious or you can like full on have a nervous breakdown. The difference in your emotions actually comes from how you nourish yourself. If you don't have enough of the earth and the water elements, if you don't feel stable, it's very easy to be swept away by things. Yeah? How is everybody? So if I asked you all, do you know how you feel when you're very hungry? Yeah? Does everybody know that feeling? Intense hunger. It suddenly hits you. What are you like? Is that who you are? No. But that is a self-inflicted stress response. And it is the main thing I do. It seems very, very simplistic, but a lot of what we feel is built here. And if you don't take the time to really nourish yourself, you will feel like you don't have control. How many people have had breakfast this morning? Okay. So, at this stage of life, at this season, right, your metabolic needs are quite high. They're high because we are dealing with slightly more difficult conditions than usual, right? Your basal metabolic rate is increased in winter because your body is trying to keep you warm, right? It's got this whole extra job that it doesn't have to do in like late spring and summer. So your energy demands are higher. It's like you have a fire, and right now the fire is a big one because it's trying to keep you comfortable. We have less sun, we have less heat, and you can feel that discomfort, the prickling when you go outside. So at times like this, staying grounded in your body is particularly important. And most people notice it. Our skin is drier, our hair is drier. We feel a little bit more antsy in the nervous system. And so keeping yourself well hydrated and well nourished, it seems like a very like thing, but it affects everything going on up here, right? So on the day where you wake up and everything feels wrong, or you just hair trigger, you know, small things are setting you off. I know it sounds very simplistic, but like I have small children, and when they are in an unpleasant state, the first thing I do is, have they eaten enough? Have they slept enough? And even as adults, it really does come down to those things. You have to really pay attention to how you nourish yourself. Because the thing that we get out of good nourishment, before the nutrition and everything, is fluid. Right? We need a lot of fluids to keep ourselves warm and nourished. And a lot of our nutrition is it's absorbed in water. Yeah, so you know, we think about nutrition as like, oh, I need my vitamins, I need my minerals, but how do those things flow into your body in liquid? Yeah, so just think about that in the context of how am I eating, and is there enough water element in my day-to-day life? Yeah, okay. Any questions so far? What we've covered so far? All of this is making sense? Okay, great. So I just wanted to talk through a couple of things that we can do in terms of understanding where blockages can occur. So when you feel tight in your body, what you're doing is also you're experiencing a tightness emotionally. Feeling loose, overly loose, so having hyperflexion is also not a great idea because you tend to throw things out. So some people get very loose in the hips. Some people get very loose in the knees. You need the balance of strength and stability as much as you need openness in your life. And what does that look like emotionally? It's boundaries. Having healthy boundaries. So if you know when you're standing in Warrior 2, if you know where your knee should go relative to your foot, if it's too far forward, there's not enough boundary and you're going to do yourself a knee injury. You following me? Yeah? If you're not pushing yourself enough, there's so much of a boundary you're tight, right? And we don't just see that in the body, we see that in how we operate in life. So something as small as making sure that when you do a position, when you are doing an asana pose, before you adjust yourself, where do you land naturally? You know, how do I show up on the mat? Can be a really interesting tool for you to work out, how do I show up in my life? You know, like for example, I know that 10 years ago, I would be the person kind of, you give me the hardest pose, I'll do it. I'll be in severe discomfort, but I'll do it. Because, I don't know, I have this thing to like do stuff because I'm trying to prove something. So I'm not holding a boundary. I'm more worried about what you think than how I feel. And that will show up in your body. Your body will shut down because it's trying to protect you on the inside because you're not protecting yourself on the outside. Yeah? And something as small as saying, no, you know what? I'm just going to hold the pose as it's meant to be. And after the class is over, I'm going to make sure that I have a nice glass of warm water. That is holding a boundary too. Yeah? So finding your own internal balance is a boundary, right? Emotionally, what does a boundary look like? Somebody says, you know, whatever, you get some criticism, right? Somebody says, oh, you know, after the class, maybe you could have done this, or maybe you didn't do that as well as you could. Watch what happens to you then. If you can take a beat before you jump into the reaction and just see how that lands with you, it is very, very interesting because it's telling you about how your Svadhisthana chakra is functioning. Yeah? So if you find that, for example, in criticism you get very defensive, that means this will probably be tight. You're closed, right? The anger tends to come because your Svadhisthana chakra sits here. Above that is Manipura. Manipura is the heat in the body, right? When there is too much heat in the body, we are quick to anger. Yeah? And so there is a place for anger. Sometimes anger can be helpful, but when it hurts and burns you from the inside and causes like heartburn and indigestion, which I see a lot of, then we have to ask ourselves, is this helpful to me? Right? So in these ways, you can start to work out, where are my boundaries? You know, what's going on with me on the inside and what can I do about it? So in terms of what to do about it, like really simple things to start, right? We live in a world that is quite shallow. Would you agree? Yeah? We kind of like to skim the surface of things, but we don't like to go deep. It's very hard and it's very intense. But these first 3 chakras...
Right onto Barclay Street, State Route 29.
Connected to her GP. Her
Oh,
phone.
okay.
Getting directions.
Yeah. It's like, who's that? Speaking of technology was where I was going with this anyway. But we live a life that requires us to be moving from one thing to another all the time. You know, whether it's friendships, relationships, work, whatever, you know, you meet someone, hi, how are you? We talk about the weather, blah, blah, blah. And look, it doesn't mean that you have to have this kind of depth and intensity with everybody. But first learn to have it with yourself. If you really unpack things, so for example, if something uncomfortable is coming up for you, are you willing to sit with it? Most of us, you know, for example, I've been going through grief. And you know, in grief, the first thing I did, the first 2 days was, I watched a lot of TV. And I don't watch a lot of TV. But I realized that my initial reaction was numbing it out. It's too hard, you know? It was so intense, I literally didn't know what to do. And I was like, okay, I'm just gonna like binge watch stuff. And I did. But it doesn't make it go away, does it? It doesn't. And so then you have to kind of get to a point where, okay, I have accepted that this has happened, and now I have to be able to sit with myself and be okay with whatever is going to come up for me. And it is often messy, and it's uncomfortable, and it is all the things, you know, there is anger, there is loss, there is fear and everything. But what I do when I'm going through hardship, the most important things are taking care of yourself. First and foremost, the harder the day, the more we need to take care of ourselves. You cannot show up for yourself emotionally if your physical needs are not met. And the most common thing I see, and I always come back to this, is, you know, we live in a world where most people, where there's so much of obesity and there's so much of diabetes and there's so much of like, you know, overconsumption. But many of the people I work with are undernourished. Right? You can eat, but we're not nourishing ourselves. Those are 2 very different things, right? And you'd be surprised what a difference feeling nourished at a very physical level does for the rest of you. You know, your body is a million years of evolution in technology. And the one thing your body knows is, if you starve, you will die. It's built into the part of your brain that you can't even see, that you can't even rationalize. But in hunger, we are a little bit of a mess. Can you all agree with me with that? Does that make sense? Yeah. So it doesn't matter how high functioning you are. When you are not nourished, you literally cannot function. And often when you are not nourished, the worst kinds of emotions and thoughts come up. Yeah? So when you think about nourishing yourself, the things that you might want to consider are, in this weather, nourish in a way that feels comforting. You know, eat the things that comfort you, that are easy to absorb, that are warm, that are friendly, things that have the earth and the water elements in them. What would that look like? Can you tell me what is the comfort food that you enjoy having in this weather? What is your go-to?
Dal.
Sorry?
Dal.
Yeah, that's right. And so, you know, when you have dal, so lentils, A, they're very high in protein, but B, they're cooked in a lot of water, right? And not just water, but we usually add a good quality fat. So whether it's ghee, whether it's sesame oil, that combination of water and oil in a meal makes the dish very nourishing because it is effortless for your body to digest, and it gives you this sense of grounding. Yeah? Anybody else? Soups, yeah, that's right. And if we think about soups, I cycle through recipes through the year because you know how, like in this weather, we all love those creamy, richer soups. So the root veggies, carrots, pumpkin, beetroot, parsnip, like the things that have a little bit of texture to them. And that's because, the root vegetables that live under the earth, they are more connected to the earth. They have a greater earth element in them. And they often, again, need to be cooked in a lot of water. You've got to really cook those things down, and they absorb a lot of water in the cooking process. And what happens to these soups and things when they run through your digestive system is, your body doesn't just absorb the vegetable, it absorbs all the water. And that water is the foundation for moving all the fluids in your Svadhisthana chakra. It becomes the lubrication in your joints. It becomes the fluid that fills your spinal column. The fattiest place in your body is your brain. Your brain consumes more than 35% of your energy every day. So when I see people who are undernourished, they are often anxious, depressed, or forgetful. So if we think about the mind and the body, you are feeding your mind as much as you are feeding your body. Everything you put in your mouth eventually becomes the energy that you experience and the emotions that you create. I've helped people fix PMS, premenstrual disorders, perimenopause, which is now a new thing that we have to deal with, apparently. Fertility issues. And all of these things actually just come from feeling too dry and too scattered in the body. Low libido. So we don't just produce fluids in menstruation. We produce fluids when we are having sexual intercourse. Dryness happens there too. And so your ability to connect with the pleasure of simple things like food is the same as your ability to connect to other kinds of pleasure. Music, sex, relationship, connection to other people. It is one and the same thing. You can't compartmentalize. It kind of all moves together. And so, when we were doing those asanas, where did you feel it the most? Your hips, yeah? Did anybody feel it so the tailbone, lower back? Yeah, so that's another place to experiment with. Your sacral chakra, your sacrum is a triangular shaped bone right at the base of your spine. And it's, for a long time we thought that bones are fixed. They don't move. But when we have studied bones further today, our bones are malleable. They actually bend. They do. And a good body bends and it doesn't break. And so in a lot of my work in terms of healthy aging, like I did a podcast yesterday about longevity, and one of the things I feel is so beautiful about us is when we become flexible everywhere. And flexibility is how you will fall and not injure yourself. When your bones have tensile integrity, that means your bone can kind of do this, but it will not snap in two. You are strong in your body. And that's because your bone has fluid too in the marrow. It is not a hollow, brittle thing. But when we are dry, even our bones are dry. And we get hurt more often. We break things very often. When I meet a client and they've had an injury related to their joints, I'm wondering what's going on here in the sacral chakra. As we get older, one of the biggest problems older adults have is falls and breaking things. That is a lot to do with getting dried out in our older age. And I'm turning 40 this year, so I'm thinking about how am I going to stay healthy as I get older too? Okay, so that's my little spiel. And I thought maybe I'd leave a bit of time for a couple of minutes of questions. Any questions around what we've talked about? Nourishment, moving the body, sacral, svadhisthana, the self, emotions. Have a think of it. Let me know if you have any questions. I just thought it's a lot to digest.
Discerning between when you are in that sexual energy, discerning between love and infatuation, and how to approach that in relationships.
Yeah. So, love is a big word. And maybe we'll start with infatuation. So when you are very open, right, and the energy is moving out of you more than is moving into you, then it's easy to become someone who becomes fixated with things outside, right? And often what we do is, when there's something that we feel is missing within us, then the natural reaction is always to look for something outside to complete what is missing within. And so when you feel that intense, like a craving, when you feel an intensity, a sharpness, I must have, it's useful to look at what's going on and whether this is just an infatuation. And it's very physical, right? Often it can be an infatuation with someone you don't even know that well. So it's quite light. It sits on the surface. There is not a lot of depth. Love is a big thing, and I suppose the thing I'll say about love is, our emotions cycle. So to me, love and relationships can almost be different, right? You can cycle through your life with one person and fall in and out of love with them. I've been married for 15 years. I don't know if I can tell you anything about I don't know if I can say for sure what that is, but when we are grounded, when you have enough of the earth and the water element, you can be with somebody, not feel crazy in love with them, but decide to stick around anyway. And that is what is a relationship. There are days where I ask myself what I'm doing with my partner. But in those days, I also recognize that I'm going through my own set of emotions, right? It's like a friendship. Sometimes you gel, sometimes you don't. But what underpins a lot of this, I think, is our values. Your values and your integrity have to underpin. That is the first chakra, Muladhara. If you have values, if you have integrity, and if you know what those things are, they should be the anchor. The emotions sit one level up. Sometimes they change. You need to decide how important how you feel is. I'm not saying it's not important, but it's not the only thing that's important, right? Because you cycle through them. If you're constantly in a particular emotional state, then it's useful to look into that. But your values, your integrity, all of those things, something has to be stable. Not everything should change all the time. So I hope that's something to think about. Yeah.
That's good, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Functional stuff? Is everybody quite comfortable in their hips and knees? Yeah? What's a difficult yoga pose?
Frog.
Yeah, frog. Very good. Yes. So frog is because this, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is the bit. So the connection over here tends to be tight. And something really simple there. So we spend too much time in chairs. Too much time in chairs. Chairs are like a new thing. We sat like this for a very long time, and our bodies are actually designed